Mr. Stopp was born on November 20th, 1948, at home in Germainsville, PA. His father's name was William P. Stopp, and his mother's name was Ann L. Stopp. His father worked at Bethlehem Steel before World War II, and afterwards, fuel and cars were scarce, so he couldn't make it to his place of employment and then decided to become a barber. While Mr. Stopp was growing up, his mother had a beauty shop, but only worked on a full-time basis after he was in 6th grade. As Mr. Stopp grew up, he went to Northwestern Lehigh High School and later decided to enter college at Kutztown University and graduated May of 1970. After graduation, he worked for a construction company as a supervisor. The company installed sewer and water lines. While working for this company, he lived in Mammoth, New Jersey. On the weekends, he would drive home to spend time with his family. That summer is when Mr. Stopp received the letter from the United States Army that he was drafted for the service. He wasn't a fan of the Vietnam conflict, but served his patriotic duty. Once the notice arrived at his family's home, he was sent to the Salvation Army in Allentown. In September of 1970, he had entered the Army. His family was very concerned about him being involved in the Vietnam conflict, since it was a very dangerous and hostile place. The military put hold on his plans of becoming a school teacher. He arrived there and boarded a bus very early in the morning. He remembers it well. They headed down the turnpike to Wilkes-Barre, PA, where the induction center was, where he became an official member of the Army. Once he made it to the induction center, he had a physical, took the oath, and was now actually a member of the armed service. A few hours later, they boarded back onto the bus and headed to Fort Dixon, New Jersey. Here he would complete his basic training. Once he arrived, they outfitted him with the proper military equipment, such as boots and a uniform. Then he was assigned to barracks. According to Mr. Stopp, basic training lasted about 8 to 10 weeks. At basic training, Mr. Stopp learned marching formations, how to use certain weapons like an M16, a grenade, and even tear gas. The physical training he did wasn't hard. He had played many sports prior to him being drafted and could pass the training easily. Mr. Stopp did a lot of physical training, like push-ups, monkey bars, and running. Mr. Stopp trained for 6 days a week. He didn't train on Sundays. He said he also had different duties or volunteer work at basic training. For example, working at the mess hall, which is just a large cafeteria. He was also assigned to patrolling the perimeter of the base and making sure where they were was a secure location. During his childhood, he was greatly immersed in Boy Scouts of America and learned skills that were useful, such as tying a knot, pitching a tent, and learning to shoot a .22 rifle. After basic training, Mr. Stopp never had to touch a rifle again. During basic training, he vividly remembers his drill sergeant, Sergeant Duet. He was a man with an impetuous influence. He would stare you down and was pure military. Other sergeants he had were Williams, Johnson, and Thompson. After basic training, he would attend specialized training. His father was involved in World War II and was in an anti-aircraft battery in Europe. One part of the service that they both shared was their time spent at Fort Bliss, Texas. Mr. Stopp was sent there for his specialized training, as well as his father. While there, he specialized in air defense and intelligence. There he attended an 8 to 10 week session of mostly academic classes. For Mr. Stopp, military life was relatable to what he did in the Boy Scouts. Regimented and just the same concept, just the military was more serious. After his advanced training of air defense and intelligence, he received his duty assignment where he would serve in Okinawa, Japan.
Many branches of the service had bases in Okinawa. There were only 50 men in the Army who were specialized in what he did. From that point on, his military career was almost an extension of college. They lived in a large dorm area and had plenty of free time, where they engaged in activities such as the organized softball league and tennis. They also spent some time at the beaches in the island. Mr. Stopp was on duty for 12 hours a day during the week. He said it was very intense, but in his time off, he would relax by writing letters to his family and friends, reading, and of course, sleeping. Once Mr. Stopp and a crew of about 8 to 10 guys he knew from advanced training took a charter jet and were transferred to Okinawa. He said that on the plane, they played bridge. When he got to Okinawa, he said it was very probably the end of January, but because it is on the same line of latitude as Florida, it was very mild, nice weather. He said they were taken to barracks where they could shower and rest. These barracks were only temporary, he said, but they had to stop there because of all the traveling they were doing. He said because of all the traveling and entering all the different time zones, he was very exhausted and he usually slept 12 hours straight. They were soon moved to their permanent barracks, as training soon started in Okinawa. Obviously, cell phones weren't available back then, so Mr. Stopp communicated with his family through letters. According to Mr. Stopp, his housing experience was like a college experience but better. Everyone had their own room, there was a maid that was there to clean every week, and he said there was a recreation type room that they called the day room where they played ping pong. There was also organized sports teams. Mr. Stopp said there was a football team and a softball team. Mr. Stopp played on the softball team. There was a draft and even a base versus base competition and tournament. He, along with a man named Brian Perry, were selected for the Island All-Star team. The team flew on a military aircraft to Subic Bay in the Philippines. Then they took a bus to Clark Air Base. When they arrived, they were put in beautiful apartments. Every week there was a tournament that he and his team participated in. Mr. Stopp didn't get much of a chance to showcase his talents at the tournament in the Philippines because he got injured when he was going after a fly ball and one of the other outfielders' knee came up and hit him in the face. His face was all black and blue and he couldn't see very well. Mr. Stopp said the competition in the tournaments was very tough. There were several minor league players that were involved. He said because of his injury, he had about one at bat and he got a hit. So he'd joke around with his teammates that were batting 150, and he'd say, "Why aren't you guys batting 1,000 like me?" Mr. Stopp's favorite sport to compete in was baseball, seeing as he played baseball throughout his childhood. Mr. Stopp said his favorite part of being in the Army was being around great people, participating in different sporting events, and getting paid for it. Mr. Stopp's position and what he did to contribute to the Army should be kept discreet, but he did say he worked in the air defense field to protect the island of Okinawa. The equipment Mr. Stopp used at his work was very high-tech at the time, almost James Bond-esque. In all his time there, he was never able to identify an enemy aircraft, which is technically a good thing. Mr. Stopp got sent home through President Nixon's early out system. His family received him as if nothing had changed, but his adjustment to civilian life was tough because he didn't have a job. But he soon found one as a lawyer and got back on his feet and is now living in Slatington, PA with his wife. Specialist C4 Charlie Stopp served overseas and had an important role in the U.S. military during the Vietnam War. Mr. Stopp lived a long, meaningful life, and we thank him for his service.